And on.
Well, hello. We're doing the live chat session, and so far we don't have anyone joining us right now, but that's okay. I'm going to say if
3 people.
Oh, we have 3. Oh, wow. That's fantastic. We have 3 people live with us at this moment. That's fantastic news. I'm happy to take any questions about any aspect of the course, about the paper. That is, of course, due relatively soon here. And I might want to just mention also, of course, many of you know that Thunderbird was originally based in Glendale, Arizona, but just in this last few months, we have moved the graduate campus down to downtown Phoenix, which is very exciting. We're part of a very thriving downtown community here in Phoenix, and we have a lot of opportunities for collaboration with other programs. So, and as you can see, maybe you can see like the tall building here in my background. We're in a high-rise. My office now is in a high-rise building here in downtown Phoenix. So it's a very exciting place to be. We're temporarily in the Arizona Center, and we're in the process, Thunderbird is in the process of, ASU is building a new building for Thunderbird that should be completed in 2 years. And it is going to be state-of-the-art, amazing, incredible, and just a couple of blocks from where I'm sitting right now. So these are very exciting times at Thunderbird. And but now we can talk about any aspect of the course, including the paper. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for me. I'm here with Heather. She's the amazing course. Oh, there. Okay. Okay. Well, she's very shy, but she's going to help with assist with any the logistics of all this and make sure that the live questions get asked. And do we have anyone asking questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. So I can start rambling on and just saying some things about the course and the assignments and the paper. Excuse me. Wow. So, excuse me. Choking on my water here. So, the paper, 5 to 7 pages, double-spaced. Excuse me. This is what you get with a live session. Isn't that interesting? But yes, applying the 3 views to a recent development, I gave you some possibilities. One person sent in a very interesting question. Hey, I would like to write the paper about a financial crisis in Malaysia in 1997. And of course, we are this week, because it is such a very interesting and illustrative case, talking about the financial crisis in South Korea in 1997, which I think illustrates so well how these crises occur, right? There is this pattern. We see this list of indicators. I gave you in a previous session on managing global financial crises, the list of indicators that would tell you, give you the warning sign that a crisis is imminent, that a country is ready to have a financial crisis. And then we talked about once the crisis does occur, if the IMF steps in to provide assistance to the country, we see that the IMF imposes a set of conditions, requirements, economic policy reforms that the country must meet to get that assistance from the IMF. And we see that those conditions tend to be very standardized across cases. There's a similar set of policies. And so what I love about this IMF and South Korea case is we see that the causes of the crisis are very similar. We see that, a country that had borrowed excessive amounts of money, that the Korean banks were borrowing massive amounts of money from foreign banks. And then the Korean banks were lending that money to the chaebol, the family-owned business conglomerates in South Korea. And they were doing that on the basis of connected lending, not necessarily on the basis of good accounting practices or making sure that the family-owned conglomerates could pay that money back. And so ultimately, this is, what part of the reason for the crisis, this massive amount of borrowing. And then when there was a crisis in Thailand and the Thai bot collapsed and investors started pulling their money out of countries. The contagion effect that we've discussed so often is common in these kinds of crises. When that happened, you know, then the foreign banks demanded that their loans through the Korean banks be repaid, and would refuse to give any more financing to those banks. And so that ground the South Korean financial system to a halt. And we probably, if we did our little list of indicators, we could have seen that all of the indicators were red. You know, a large current account deficit, large foreign debt, political risk, or at least the contagion effect. A lot of these factors were present to explain this crisis. So someone has proposed writing a paper applying the three views to discuss the IMF's role or what happened, the financial crisis in Malaysia. And so I think that is a very interesting topic, because Malaysia had sort of a different experience, right, from South Korea and Thailand and some of these other countries. And Malaysia had imposed capital controls and did not experience the same massive devaluation and massive crisis to the extent that some of these other countries did. So they went against the liberal policies of the IMF. So it would be very interesting to look at that country applying the three views, you know, what they did, how they approached some of these policies differently from some of the other countries, and what does the liberal view think of that? What does the economic nationalist worldview, how would they look at what had happened in Malaysia? So that was a very interesting topic. I had proposed that you could also look at, you know, you could even look at things like trade disputes. Maybe your country was involved in a trade dispute. You could look at that. You could look at the efforts by the Indian government to liberalize restrictions, remove restrictions on foreign investment, and to move in a more liberal policy direction, right, in recent years. And so how would the three views look at those kinds of developments in India? So there's a lot of different things that you could look at in these papers. So I'm assuming that many of you are already deep into your paper topics, but I'm happy to answer any questions on that. And, you know, I can stop here. It looks like we have 5 people online. I'd love to hear any questions about any aspect of the course, any topic.
I can post on the discussion board too.
And you can post on the discussion board as well. If you're, you know, that would be how you can ask the question. You can just post on the discussion board. We have a question.
I find it a bit challenging to clearly distinguish between economic nationalists and structuralists. Can you shed a light on this, please?
Okay, so that's a great question. That is a little confusing. That is difficult at times, right? Because I think the key distinction is the economic nationalist view is saying that the way the world works, remember, each one of these worldviews has that empirical aspect and the normative aspect. The empirical aspect is this is how the world works, and then the normative aspect is this is how the world ought to work. And so for the economic nationalists, the empirical aspect is that governments interfere in market forces to promote the national interests of their country. And the normative aspect would be that's how things ought to be, right? Governments should be looking out for the national interest of their country. And so I think what is interesting here is this is a saying that governments can operate within the context of a capitalist market economy. There is no problem with that. Economic nationalists have no problem with a capitalist market economy whatsoever. They just want the government to interfere to some extent, to influence or intervene in the market economy to promote the overall national interest of the country. And so what that means is that the government would, yes, it would interfere with market forces. It would not eliminate capitalism or it doesn't necessarily mean that the government is going to eliminate the market mechanism altogether. They will still allow, companies to exist, private corporations to exist. They will still allow trade to occur. It just means that the government is going to intervene to some extent, interfere with market forces to some extent, not eliminate market forces, but interfere with them to make sure that that country, the country that the government belongs to, its overall national interests are promoted or advanced, even if it means harming the national interests of other countries. So an example, governments would put up protectionist barriers to trade. They wouldn't eliminate trade, or they wouldn't eliminate capitalism. They would just put up tariffs on taxes to protect industries in that country from competition and promote the development of those industries. Or they might give subsidies, right, financial benefits to their own domestic companies to promote the interests of their own domestic companies. Later in the course, we're going to look at a case of the Chinese government subsidizing companies in the wind turbine sector to promote that new industry that the Chinese government determined was very much in the strategic interest of China. So the point is that the government is interfering with market forces, not getting rid of capitalism, but interfering just to promote the national interest of the country. And that natural interest could encompass not just economic interests for the country, but strategic interests as well, right? Overall military interest even, or strategic interests of some kind. So the structuralist view, on the other hand, is saying that governments are, in a capitalist country, governments just carry out the orders of the big corporate interests, the dominant corporations of that capitalist country. So the structuralists would say, in a capitalist market economy, it isn't the government that is deciding what is in the overall best interest and interfering in the market to promote the overall national interest of the country. It's big corporations that are deciding what is in their own narrow, selfish corporate interest, and getting the government of that country to carry that out, to carry out the orders of big business, right? And so that comes straight out of the Communist Manifesto of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, where they said that in a capitalist market economy, the government is just, carrying out the orders. The state, the government, is just carrying out the orders. It's just the executive committee carrying out the orders of the bourgeoisie, of the dominant capitalist class. So the structuralist view would say that's how capitalist market economies work, but of course they would not agree that that's how things ought to be. They would say what ought to happen is there should be a socialist revolution where the workers rise up and eliminate capitalism altogether, and that would be the structuralist worldview, right? So it's very different. So I think that's how we would differentiate those two. I don't know if I've answered that. Please let me know, follow up, any questions. And keep in mind, I'm a professor, so I can go on and on and on for hours and hours nonstop. So I'll try to keep my answers shorter. Was there another question?
Is there anything you don't want us to discuss, or an avenue that we should avoid on the research paper? On the research paper that you don't want to discuss, or an avenue that you should avoid on the research paper?
Well, let me think here. I think that pretty much any recent current event where you can apply the three views is fair game. I don't know that there's any, I don't see any problem with that. It could be an historical event, as I said. Someone is doing a paper about the Malaysian financial crisis, applying the three views to how the Malaysian government handled that crisis. So I'm trying to think, as long as you are applying the three views to the event or the trade dispute or the financial crisis or what other relevant topic, it should be a topic relevant to, right, to our course, to states and markets in a global economy, of course. I think we should be okay. Yeah.
Somebody else just asked about sources to have. Oh, are there any sources to have their paper peer reviewed before they submit? Like the OWL, Purdue, like other online sources that you find helpful?
Now, can you repeat that question? I'm not sure I understood that question.
They just asked, I was wondering if sources have to be peer reviewed.
Ah, if the sources have to be peer reviewed.
Yeah.
No. I mean, of course, I would like to see a mix, a wide range of sources. So, yeah, that'd be great to have some peer-reviewed articles, right? Some articles, journal articles, scholarly journal articles that have undergone the process of peer review. Of course, that would be great. But I also would like to see. I would prefer actually that it not only be that, right? Or it depends on the nature of the subject matter. For older topics like that Malaysian financial crisis, 1997, there are bound to be some really great, excellent journal articles, academic journal articles that might discuss that well. But for more recent topics, especially, I would like you to look at some recent news articles, newspaper stories, right? That from respected, legitimate news sources, Financial Times, those kinds of sources, Wall Street Journal, established, respected newspapers from any region of the world, of course, that, and so I would like you to look at that too. So a wide range of sources would be useful. And then, of course, cite the sources. I did give you some guidelines on that.
Another question was the rubric for the research paper assignment and any insight of what you're looking for in this paper.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember. I think that we don't have the rubric there yet. Is that right? It is there yet. It is already there.
It's in week 2.
Okay.
I'll find it.
Yeah. So we're trying to remember exactly where it is. It is available to you now to look at. And is it in week 2? I'm trying to remember where we put that. Drafting the research paper. So if you go back and look at week 2,
yes,
the rubric is right there.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, so you can look, I would look under week 2, drafting the research paper. There's some guidelines on what I'm looking for, gives you some suggestions for possible paper topics. And I am, just a couple of things I can tell you off the top of my head. Oh, okay, in week 3, there is an additional, there's even a little video that I made, or that's not a video, but the rubric is in week 3, sorry. We were trying to remember, where did we put that rubric? Where did I have that rubric? And so, in fact, it is in week 3. It is in week 3. And if you click on the link, writing your research paper, that is the actual rubric. What we were talking about in week 2 is just guidelines for the paper topic, how to write the paper. But the actual rubric is in week 3, writing your research paper. And yeah, it's pretty clear what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a wide range of sources, for example. Yeah, I gave a lot of thought to this rubric, so I think it is worth looking at that. Was there another? I think there was another question there.
Yeah, we've got lots of questions.
This is great. I love these questions.
This person says, I want to thank you for teaching this course, and I'm enjoying the lectures and material. I'm writing the midterm paper applying the 3 views of NAFTA renegotiation.
Nice. Great topic.
What are the preferred sources for this type of research paper?
Okay, so this is a great example because this is very much something that is in process right now, that is happening right now. And so there may not be a lot of journal articles on this. I'd like to be one of the journal articles writing one of those now on this same topic. But so again, this is where you're going to have to rely maybe pretty heavily on, respectable newspaper accounts, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. Now, you may or may not have access to all of those, but you can get access to the Financial Times relatively easily. ft.com. You can get a look and see what's going on. So those would be good, respected sources. And of course, any other, sources on that, because that is very much a very current event topic. So you may not find a lot of established peer-reviewed journal articles on that.
What sources should not be used? We already told them don't use Wikipedia.
Wikipedia. Don't use Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a good starting place. You might say, okay, it gives me a gist of what the topic is. Wikipedia itself will cite sometimes some really legitimate sources. But the problem with Wikipedia, it's very interesting. I find it fascinating. It's really a great source to start. But the problem is that it's one of these kind of things where people can post something, all elephants are pink, and it will take a little while before the editors of Wikipedia, the people that actually, monitor these things and check this and to fix that, right? And so, it's not as the most as reliable in that sense. I think it is pretty reliable. I think it's actually, I love Wikipedia myself, but you don't want to use it as a source that you're citing. You want to go back to, established journal, newspaper, magazine, respected, published sources. Okay.
For the research paper are podcasts such as the Investment Podcast, where the guest is Richard Duncan from the IMF and WTO, acceptable sources, or do you want them only to be written sources? Okay,
that's a great question. Sure, that would be perfectly acceptable. Just make sure you cite it, and the guidelines I gave for citations might give you some guidance on that. And then as an underlying, if you're not sure exactly how to cite it, just the underlying principle when you're citing sources, please do try to follow the guidelines to the extent you can. But if you just can't figure out how to cite something, just try to figure out a way to cite it so that if I want to see it again, if I want to go to your source, I can find it, right? So if I'm saying, I'm not so sure about this source that this person cited, or, wow, that's a really, really interesting source, I want to go look at it myself. Cite it in a way where I could find it again if I wanted to.
There's a question that we'll come back to. It's about the final exam, but I don't want to jump to that yet.
Okay.
Let's see.
Are we having another one of these?
Yeah, we'll do another one closer to the final, if possible, but we can talk about it again.
Okay.
Let's see. I think we've got everything so far. What other guidelines or anything else you want to tell them to focus on? So, trade disputes, financial crisis, maybe other topics that you could suggest?
Yeah. So, you all seem to have proposed some interesting topics. The current renegotiation of NAFTA is a great topic. And again, these current events topics are really always very interesting. And usually there is a lot of great journalism, good newspaper accounts, that you can look at to evaluate what's going on. Podcasts and things like that are always okay as well if you cite them properly. But so let me think of some other possible topics. For example, there's currently a trade dispute going on between the United States and China on steel. And the U.S. has put a big dramatic increase in tariffs on steel. The U.S. is trying to justify that. The U.S. government is saying we need to do this for national security reasons. So they're trying to make an economic nationalist argument that free trade would be damaging to the United States economy and to the U.S. overall national security interests. And we're taking this government action interfering with market forces for national security reasons, right? But So it'd be very interesting to look at that interesting trade dispute from the three views. The economic nationalist view would be kind of the view of the U.S. government, but we know that the WTO is going to have a very different view. We already know how the WTO is going to rule about this, and we know that they'll probably strike down that action by the United States and authorize retaliatory action that China can take. So that's a very interesting current topic.
I'm writing my research paper on the current land reform policy change in South Africa. Could you give me some guidelines in terms of how I could apply this to the different world views? Please also indicate how long the comparison should be.
Okay, well, there's a hot topic, right? There's a very interesting, very much in the news, very great topic. Okay, so the land reform change in South Africa could give some guidelines on how the three views could be applied to this. So, well, very, very interesting. Okay, so that's I love this topic because it takes, it makes you think a little bit about it, doesn't it? Because on the one hand, the liberal worldview has as one of its fundamental principles, one of its fundamental assumptions, a strong belief in property rights, right, for individual people. And so there might be, from that point of view, they might have some concerns about this. At the same time, the embedded liberal view, right, would say that there are times when the government must intervene, right, which could even extend to the point of there might be times when there needs to be redistribution of land if there has been, to make sure that the market economy functions properly, to make sure that it's not just a skewed distribution of wealth that is going to hamper the proper workings of the capitalist market economy. I mean, so you could argue that an embedded liberal might say there are times when a land reform would be completely legitimate, justified, makes sense to improve the efficiency of the marketplace. At the same time, now structuralists, right, might say. So again, this isn't really my field, and I just have a sense of what is going on here with this land reform in South Africa. But structuralists might say that up until now, the South African economy has been promoting corporate interest and those who have the haves rather than the have-nots. And so finally now a government is taking actions to correct some of these, overcome this. And of course, there's going to be backlash and resistance. And so you could look at it from the structuralist point of view as saying this is, long overdue. Finally, the government is standing up to the landed elites, the corporate interests. On the other hand, an embedded liberal might say liberals would be very much in favor of respecting property rights, but an embedded liberal might say there are times when some government intervention might be called for to make sure the market economy actually is functioning properly. We don't want just a total inegalitarian distribution of wealth that is going to skew the results. So I know that's an extremely controversial topic. I'm going to give you some leeway in a topic like that. It's a touchy issue. It's a very controversial issue, but really interesting. That would be a great topic because it's very current, very controversial. A lot of written about it. You won't find a shortage of sources. Was there another question, I thought?
Yeah, this one is in regards to the the weekly response questions that are not, or self-reflections. Are they graded? And yes, they're graded. So they just said, I was wondering.
For those that are registered in the class, yes, right?
Yeah.
Those postings that's part of the class?
So like week 1, there's this self-reflection. So they write their paper and
oh, right. Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
No, that's part of the thing.
grade.
Yeah.
So that's
your own grade. Yeah, that's right.
So
that's right. So
be fair.
do it right. You know, do what you think is right. That's very kind of an innovative thing that I had not used before, but this is part of this MicroMasters is very interesting. I like it.
And those questions will potentially show up in the final.
That's right. That's right.
There is value in doing them and being fair in your score.
That's true. That's right. So, well, we're sure lucky that Heather is here helping this. So,
let's see.
Everyone wants to ask you a question. I don't know. Yeah?
Not yet.
Okay, that's at the end.
Yeah, we saw the responses. We got that one. Give yourselves. So yeah, so the grade that you're giving yourselves for those responses, I guess.
Okay, here's Heather. Here's Heather, finally. Okay.
So the grade that you're doing in the self-reflections will show up in the grade book, but they're a lower percentage of your overall grade. So everything has a different weight. So the self-reflections, if you give yourself, if it's 20 points, you give yourself a 20 out of 20, it's only 5 or 10% of the overall grade. So yeah, there is worth in doing it because it will be something you'll see in the final exam. And then just be fair. So if you kind of did a really quick last minute paper, then you should be fair and not give yourself the full points. But, you know, take your time. I know it's a self-reflection. You feel like, oh, I should get a grade from the instructor, but you're going to get your grade in this week.
You know, but be generous to yourself. I think, you know, that's my policy. And it's, you know, it kind of gets you thinking. That was the whole point. It's it's an innovative technique that I had not used myself, but Heather taught me how to do this. So thank you. That's really clever.
Yeah. And so make sure you continue to do it. So you had it in week 1 and week 2. Week 3 will be graded. And you'll get feedback from Jennifer, who is the TA. And then in weeks 4 and 5, you'll also do the self-reflection. So make sure, again, you're fair and give yourself a grade that is representative of your work. And then in week 6, we'll talk about the final. I'll have Professor Nelson talk about the final exam, multiple choice kind of thing. But we'll continue working on
We'll come back and do it one of these. Okay.
Yeah, or we can in the last 5 minutes.
If there's,
okay. Yeah, if there's no more questions. Because
we have another, we can talk about it right now.
Yeah, or do you have any, let's see if we have any more.
Okay, I'm happy to talk about the.
Oh, okay. Can you give your opinion on the debate from week 2 and your thoughts of, I can't say their name.
Stiglitz versus Rogoff.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad we're getting a question about that. Well, you know, here's an interesting thing about this. Stiglitz is very critical of the IMF because the IMF imposes such standardized, and the term he uses, cookie cutter, like you're making cookies, the same pattern every time. The IMF always imposes the same conditions, right, on every country that it gives assistance to. The conditions that it requires the country to make to the economic policy reforms it requires countries to make, my chair fell down here, are always the same in every case. And so I think that's one of the big complaints that Stiglitz had about the IMF. So what's interesting is in his critique of the IMF, what I saw at the economic crisis, right, is his critique of the IMF and especially how it acted during the Asian financial crisis. One of his main complaints is these conditions such as drastic cuts in government spending, dramatic increases in interest rates, dramatic reductions in restrictions on foreign investment, especially foreign direct investment in a country. He's saying that some of these conditions can be devastating for a country's economy. especially during a crisis. And he said in the United States, if there's an economic crisis, U.S. government doesn't, cut spending and raise interest rates. To the contrary, it does the reverse of that. It will have a stimulus plan. Spending will lower interest rates to get the economy moving. So Stiglitz, I think, is critical of the IMF for its conditions and for its lack of customization of these conditions to the specific needs of individual countries. And I think he may have a point, right? He may have a bit of a point there because, even the previous managing director of the IMF, before he resigned in a scandal, he had a personal scandal unrelated to any of this, but Dominique Strauss-Kahn, the previous managing director of the IMF, was moving in the direction of maybe some of these conditions are just too harsh, right? But then when he was replaced by the current managing director, Christine Lagarde, she went back to a very orthodox liberal view. No, we must impose these conditions in this very standardized manner. So that is, I think, Stiglitz had a very interesting point. Now, Rogoff, who was the chief economist of the IMF at the time that the debate between Stiglitz and Rogoff happened, was trying to defend the IMF and its approach and saying, look, I mean, of course the IMF is going to recommend that countries drastically cut spending because these countries are in a financial crisis, in part because probably they've been spending excessively. They've been financing their spending by selling government bonds to foreign investors. Now they're in a crisis. Nobody wants to buy their government bonds. They're going to the lender of last resort, the IMF, for help. What are they supposed to do? Increase spending? Who's going to finance that? And that's where Rogoff gets, sort of sarcastic. He says, on the planet Earth, we Earthlings realize you can't do that. So I think he has a point as well. So some people have looked at Stiglitz's critique and said, gee, in some ways he sounds like a structuralist. He's critical of the IMF. He's saying that some of these IMF directors are implementing policies that serve big corporate interests, that the IMF seems to be just a tool of the corporations. But then if you look again at his critique more closely, he's saying, well, I agree with what the IMF is doing. It's just the conditions shouldn't be as harsh as they are. Maybe do they have to be that tough? So I think it's more of a question of degree. It's not a question of should the IMF exist? As structuralists would say, no, get rid of the IMF. Get rid of capitalism. That isn't what Stiglitz is saying. He's just saying, I agree with the IMF and its purpose and its even conditions. Just the conditions, maybe they could be a little softer. That's all he's saying. So I would argue that Stiglitz really is an embedded liberal. He believes in the IMF. He believes in its mission. He just thinks it should modify a little bit how it does things. And Rogoff is more of an orthodox, I don't care if it's harsh, So it's just more of a question of degree, you see. But the bottom line, why all of this is relevant to you as international managers is this. The fact that the IMF, whether we agree with it or not, imposes these conditions in such a standardized cookie cutter way gives you a huge advantage because now if you see a country in a crisis and you see the IMF going in to help that country, you know exactly what conditions it will impose. You know the impact economically that those conditions will have. And knowing all that in advance can help you design a more effective strategy for your company. So that's why that was really useful, I think, to know that and go into that.
Okay, they're still asking more questions. Do you recommend the books of Stiglitz or any other books to understand better the IMF?
Yeah, there are some books. Oh boy, I forgot now the most recent author of. There was another Bluestone. Look up Bluestone. There's an author with that last name that has published a book a few years back on the IMF. Very, very good. I'm thinking that's his last name. I just want to. But now Stiglitz's book is also extremely interesting globalization and its discontents. You know, and Stiglitz is a very respected economist and scholar. He did win the Nobel Prize for economics, right? He's a pretty smart guy, but he obviously is very critical of the IMF. And so I do think his book, Globalization and Its Discontents, is very useful because it gives you a very critical perspective on the IMF's role in some very important financial crises in recent times. And so that's really what the book is about. It's Stiglitz's critique of the IMF's approach to financial crises. And he talks, for example, he has one chapter in that book about the IMF's approach to the financial crisis in Russia that I think does highlight some problems with the IMF's approach in that specific case. For instance, the IMF insisted that Russia privatize all of the state-owned enterprises, of course. That's a typical condition the IMF will impose on any country. But this privatization was handled very poorly. And what ended up happening is the privatized corporations ended up in the hands of those that had influence and could bribe the people doing the privatization process. And now that's how we ended up with these corrupt oligarchs that control huge corporations, and there isn't real competition in certain sectors of the Russian economy. So the Russian economy is not very efficient, is not well managed, and we have this dominance of these rich oligarchs who have, through corrupt means, have obtained control of major sectors of the Russian economy. And they are linked closely with the leader of Russia. I know I'm being very critical right now of what's going on, but Stiglitz would say, he would point back to the financial crisis in Russia and the IMF's help in that crisis, and the way that the privatization was handled in particular really was not handled effectively. And I think even the IMF would agree. And the outcome has been bad for Russia's economy and for the world, I think, because these oligarchs have a lot of influence, and then anyway, now we don't want to get into some other issues we could get into, but.
So this person said, I watched the debate a few times. At first pass, Stiglitz comes off as cocky, and the other guy, can't say his name, Rogoff approached him like a bully. However, the more I watched the video, the more I seem to agree with Stiglitz. Is there something to this?
No, I mean, I think that, as I said, I think Stiglitz, and we're talking about the Stiglitz-Rogoff debate that I gave as a video to watch, because Stiglitz is very critical of the IMF, just kind of the same things that I've already said, that I think he did raise some legitimate points, right? That sometimes the IMF's conditions are so harsh that it could even be counterproductive, right? And so he's just saying, he's not saying don't have conditions. When the IMF gives assistance, he's saying that do they have to be as harsh as they are? And I think that is a legitimate, valid point. Because we've seen in some cases where the conditions are so harsh that, there's a backlash against the IMF, or there's a backlash even against the market economy itself, right? And that's not good. I think that countries. My expertise is in Latin America, so countries such as Venezuela, in an earlier period before the advent of the socialist government in Venezuela, were implementing market-oriented policies that at the behest of the IMF, some of these conditions were being imposed by the IMF. And there was such a backlash that people kind of revolted and ended up electing a socialist president, Hugo Chavez. Now, Hugo Chavez was in there and really almost ruined the Venezuelan economy, so that was not productive. His successor, Maduro, is in there now. Nicolas Maduro is making things even worse. The country's on the brink of collapse. So I don't think that, these tough, you can understand the logic behind them and so on, but do they have to be that harsh that you end up with a backlash, right? and then you get something that is not at all what the IMF would have wanted, a socialist government. And we see what has happened as a result of that in Venezuela. Mm.
Somebody said, can you please explain the difference between liberalist and neoliberalism?
Okay, so, and by the way, I don't know why this is, but just the way these words work is, it's for some reason it's economic nationalism and economic nationalist, Marxism and Marxist, structuralism and structuralist. But for some reason, when it comes to the word liberal, it's liberalism, and instead of liberalist, which would make sense, right? It's instead of liberalist, it's liberal. Okay, so you would say that person is a liberal, not that he is a liberalist, right? I don't know why. Again, I can't explain how the English language works sometimes, but that's the way you would do it. So you'd say that a liberal worldview, the WTO is pursuing a liberal free trade policy. Now, difference between liberal and neoliberal. I don't think there really is any, because neo just means new, and it just means this term was most widely used in the 1980s because we saw that there seemed to be a trend toward a liberal approach. Again, there had been a lot of economic nationalism and government intervention in the economy. I'm thinking especially in Latin America, but all over the world. And there seemed to be a new trend toward a return to liberalism, a new liberalism in the 1980s in the United States and in Latin America and everywhere else in the world. And so I think people were referring to that as neoliberalism, new liberalism. So at least in my mind, some people may impose specific meanings to that, but it just means a return to the liberal approach.
That was everything.
That's everything. Okay.
So you want to talk about the final, just in case we don't do another section?
Okay, the final multiple choice questions.
Yeah. So here's the final exam.
Okay.
25 questions.
25. Just reminding me exactly. Believe me. We spent a lot of time on these questions. 25 questions related to the content of weeks 1 through 5 inclusive, and all of this is spelled out. There is a link to spell this out, right? What the final exam is.
I'll post it for them too in the description.
And Heather's, isn't that nice? She's going to post it for you guys. All of the details, but basically the multiple choice questions, it's not asking you to remember specific dates or specific names, but just to understand the concepts of the course, right? And to kind of be able to apply those concepts. And so there may be some specific questions about some readings, but if you had done the reading, right, it's the kind of questions where if you did the reading, the idea, at least in theory, oh, okay, that should be easy, right? You should be able to answer that question, but it's less emphasis on memorization of specific facts or years or dates or anything like that, not like that. It's more applying concepts, understanding the worldviews and how they work and how you can apply them, and key aspects of how the IMF works and the WTO and the World Bank Group. And so that's the emphasis of the final, not brute memorization. Doesn't gonna help. It's not, dates and names, and it's not that kind of exam. It's more understanding the concepts will enable you to answer these questions.
They only have one attempt. They have 3 hours.
Yeah, so once you click on the exam and start the exam, you have to finish it within 3 continuous hours. Mm-hmm. So this comes up sometimes. You can't start it 10 minutes, save it, and then go away for 6 hours and come back and finish it. No, once you click on it, you have to. It's going to shut on you at 3 hours after 3 hours, unless you submit it first. And so that's important to know.
Yeah.
And you only have one attempt.
And it's proctored. So that's why it's 3 hours continuous.
And it is proctored. It is proctored.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So again, these Heather is the expert on these technological aspects, how that works, and it's amazing. So Heather,
I guess I'll talk again. So make sure before you start the exam that you go through the process that's in the before the course begins, because it goes over the how to set up the practice proctor exam. So basically, there's just canned questions just to see if you have the right software on your computer. So you can test it now. So go in there and make sure that your computer is compatible with our proctoring services. It will have you do kind of like a fake proctoring. You're not going to get any feedback if your room, make sure like this room would be perfect for taking an exam because there's nothing on the walls. His desk is completely empty.
I just moved in here. That's
So all those things we take into consideration. So make sure you really pay attention and focus on what's going on in the proctoring. If you have taken other courses through the MicroMasters, so TGM 579 does have proctoring as well. So if you've already taken TGM 579, you're used to proctoring because we use that in that course.
Is that the leadership class or the marketing class?
I think that's the leadership.
Okay.
Yes, Mansour's class.
Oh, okay.
Professor Habibah.
Okay.
His class also, I always say it wrong. Mansour.
Yeah, I don't know. His office is down the hall here, but I'm answer Javidan. Yeah.
So make sure if you took that class, it's exactly the same. So nothing new. If you're new to proctoring, like I said, make sure that you've gone through and you've checked your system requirements. Everything is good. And then, yes, please do not walk away. Just like right now, we have our webcam on. So you will be watched. There is a live person watching you take the exam. If you have any questions, also make sure to post on the discussion board and I'll jump in and Jennifer will jump in and we'll answer it for you. But, take it very seriously and practice early because, of course, something tends to happen. You do have an entire week to take the exam. So just make sure you're ready to take it. And when you take it, I would recommend taking it on a day that is a weekday because, you have Tuesday to take it. If you try on the weekend, everybody's calling the support line. And we do have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week support. But again, you don't want to take it on Monday and have technical issues, and then you can't take the final. So that's my piece.
Wow, these are really, really amazing, great advice. Thank you. Wow. We're so lucky, So, okay, well.
Let's see if there's any last questions because we're coming up to our time. Oh, can you have learning material with you during the exam? No, it is a closed note.
Proctored,
closed note.
Wow,
closed book.
this is really.
Yeah. So
it's a very rigorous program here. It is. It is.
So make sure you can go back to your quizzes and you can look at your quizzes after you've done them. So we recommend doing that. We recommend looking at your papers. Make sure that
although the quiz questions and the final exam questions are definitely
totally
not the same.
Not the same. Totally different.
Yeah.
But you
same
can
format.
Yes. And you can go back and you can kind of make sure you have the basic concepts. But yes, once a quiz ends and it's done. So right now, weeks 1 and 2, feel free to go back and look at them and see what you got wrong.
Good idea.
And make sure you know.
Yeah.
But all new questions.
No questions.
Yeah, all new questions.
That's right.
Articles that may not have shown up in your quizzes so far. So every single article in the course is up for grabs because
fair game. Fair game. Yeah, it's not this is not an easy it's not an easy course, is it? No.
So let's see. One last question.
One last question.
If we have one.
Okay.
Nope, I think that's everything.
That's it. Okay,
perfect, and it's 3 o'clock, right on time.
Right on the dot. Okay, well, thank you. I good luck. And let us know. Any questions. Jennifer is there to answer. And fantastic. All right. Thanks so much, Heather. Thank you.
Welcome.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Great. Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. All right. That's it.